Just give it a second for it to finish. Perfect. Welcome back to Boss Uncaged podcast. So today's episode is, I always say this episode is going to be an interesting episode because everyone I interview is definitely interesting. But today, I think you're probably going to be a little bit more surprised than the normal aspect, right? So today we're talking to NOA AON, and just his name alone, right? I mean, obviously, it is a name that he's given himself. We're going to talk about the etymology and the breakdown of that particular name and that title, what that really means. But first and foremost, I like to give whoever I'm interviewing a particular nickname. So by doing my due diligence, I was thinking, okay, like what kind of nickname can I give someone that's so influential, that's been through so many different things, that has started so many different businesses and being so successful, but at the same time has like the Zen, the yin and the yang all working equally for him at the same time. So I decided to name him the Harmonious Boss. And as this interview progresses, you're going to know exactly why I'm calling him that. So the floor is yours. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit more about you and what do you want to talk about today?
Thank you so much. It's so funny. I usually give people nicknames, especially in our company culture. And now I'm being given a nickname. I'm honored and so grateful to be here with you. And also welcome everyone. I think, today we're going to talk about life. And I don't know about you, but more and more I'm finding that integration, whatever it's time with your career, it's time with your family, with yourself. I mean, we tend to bucket and put our life into different buckets, but really we don't realize that the lesson is the same. It's just a, translated a little bit different. So, I've been on this journey through self-transformation. I've been on a really dark journey, but also very bright journey.
Oh.
And I think I really want to ask to be used as an instrument of message that will serve you, so you don't have to go through the same pain that a lot of us unfortunately do.
Got it. Yeah. So I think with that, I think the first thing that we should talk about is kind of historic to who you are, right? I want to talk about the etymology behind your name, right? So I did my research and it comes to find out that it means movement, all or none. So I want you to kind of like, is that the meaning that you wanted to go for, or what does your name actually mean to you?
Yeah, so Noah means movement in Hebrew, and it's got also a bunch of other meanings, but I particularly picked the movement because I was always on this mission, and the mission has been, how do we unify the world? I don't know about you, but all or none actually symbolizes, AON actually symbolizes all or none. And it also means this duality. So you've got the goods, you've got the bads, you've got the highs, you've got the lows. And my whole life, I've been playing this tennis of light and darkness. Now, when I say light, I'm talking about fun, joyful, awesome experiences. But then when I say dark, I'm talking about, choosing to drink alcohol and choosing to, hurt people and doing the dark part of my life. Now, what I've noticed is that we all have these two voices, and it's who do we pay attention to too often, which either gets us in trouble or bring us on a path of light. Now, it symbolizes duality. So Noah is the good guy, so to speak. Aeon is the bad guy, but the mission is to go into harmony, which is right in the middle. And it's kind of bypassing the duality altogether, because I've been sick and tired of seeing inequality, like whatever is the company culture, like why is somebody employee and employer, and why do we have this, system that is built on very limited amount of people that can hack the system to win over someone else. And I'm sick of that. And for me, it's been about triple benefit, how it benefits me, how it benefits you, and how it benefits the whole, the planet Earth that we live on. And if it's not of this frequency, I don't do it, I don't touch it, and I'm not interested. And so, that's kind of where this foundation began. And it came from a cave. I went into dark cave and spent 10 days without any food, without any light, to basically go through enough hell to find myself for who I am, not for who I am not. And out of this place, Noah Aeon came about.
Wow. So, that's a great segue. Out of all the things you could have done to essentially find the enlightenment, you chose to go to a dark place and survive just on water for like, a period of time. I want you to talk about that experience. Like, and obviously I think that was pretty much, that was after you was owning multiple different orange theories. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so basically, maybe I'll reverse a little bit. So my
Yeah.
whole life, I've been seeker of truth. So no matter if I was, 14, 15 years old, studying and reading books, or where I am today, I've always just questioned everything because something wasn't clicking. And, we grew up in a society to be told to go to school, to, learn a sequence of different programming that we're inheriting. And then we live this limited life, which is essentially AON, right? It's that fearful driven lifestyle that if we accidentally move out of the box, then we're, it's fearful, right? We're purposely feared to look outside of the comfort zone. Now, then you've got this whole other life, which is outside of the comfort, outside of the norm, which means we recreate anew. Now, I have committed myself in a very young age. Since 5 years old, I grew up with shaman back in Czech Republic, which is where I'm from. And essentially, I, had this spiritual side, but also this physical side.
Mhm.
So I had this like balance in a way where I understood what it is to go to work and make money, but also I kept up with my spiritual self, which is later on helped me find the balance. Now, in this process, I told myself that every 2 to 3 months I'm gonna expose myself through something very uncomfortable. And so I went around the world. I was traveling from guru to teacher to shaman to everything that's unseen in a search for truth. I wanted to know what's the true meaning of life. What is it that I'm doing wrong that I continue having depression and anxiety and even though I might have money, but that doesn't really translate into happiness. So I committed myself, and essentially the biggest pivotal moment happened inside of this cave. It's in Thailand, and it's 10 days with Jas Muhin, who is a breatharian. It's as out there as it gets. And essentially, my purpose was I wanted to get out of there and leave my phone behind, and I needed peace.
Mhm.
And at that time, I had almost 100 locations under my belt in 7 different regions in America with Orange Theory Fitness, plus a whole bunch of other investments that I have, cultivated during this time. Now I was burned out. I was like, cool, another Orange Theory or 3 of them at 1 week. That was like my max, that I literally opened 3 of them in 3 different states in 1 week. And I was like, for what? I was still empty inside. And so went in there, left my phone, and it took about 7 days before I lost it. And when I say lost it, I start crying and I start releasing and surrendering into who I am, not into who I was thinking to be or what society made me to be. And in there, I had a major shift. And I was like, I don't want to just be here for my personal self-interest. I want to live in service of others. And I want to bring 15 years of traveling and learning from all of this wisdom into a simple, fun, easy, digestible, teachings, which is now the teachings of NOA. Now, in that cave, I had a clear vision, which was the NOA AON, which was how do we create a modern pathway for ascension for everyday person that can integrate their physical health, their mental health, their emotional well-being, their spiritual connection, their relationships, basically everything that makes up who we are. How do we bring a balance to it and a clear, simple path to realization? And that basically, made me walk out of the cave
Mhm.
and essentially completely move into creating workshops, retreats, and lectures, and what I'm doing essentially today.
Wow. So, I mean, I think that there's so many different things we could kind of unpack from that. I think, first of all, you said you had over 100 locations, right? So I want someone to kind of put that in perspective, right? You probably know someone that owns a gym or started a gym singular, but essentially you started it at scale, and you didn't just start it Georgia and California. I think you also had some locations in Hawaii as well. So you're kind of like breaking out the national and kind of going into the international space to a certain extent. So I want you to talk about like how did you get into that to begin with, considering where you are right now, how did you get into that space?
Yeah, so it was actually 17 years old when I started my first company. And that's back in Czech, where my dad gave me a choice. You either go to school, your life is paid for, or you do your little cycling thing, which I was an aspiring, athlete at that time. And your life, you're gonna have to figure it out. And so essentially what I did, I wanted to, race bikes. I wasn't interested in school, and just a little drop into this, I was so far from comprehending the regular school system that I actually ended up paying my friend to finish my high school for me and
Mm.
ship the diploma to my father, just to satisfy, the basic needs of society. And so I don't even have a high school technically. I've everything that I've learned is through self-studies, workshops, retreats, and really learning through what I thought was meaningful to me.
Mhm.
And essentially at the age of 17, I start trading between Alibaba and eBay. So I filled a need, which was carbon bikes back then for groups of people like me that couldn't afford, $5,000-$10,000 bikes. And essentially, I found a picture on Alibaba directly from factory. I copied and pasted the picture on eBay, and then I sold it on eBay, but shipped it directly from China,
Mm.
and it required $0 to start. So essentially, this is before Alibaba was known and what it is today, and it wasn't trusted enough. So I had to take the leap of that. So that was my first business. Then from there, I helped out my father with real estate. I had a whole bunch of history with finding locations and fixer ups and doing that piece. And there was a pivotal moment in between all of this when I was this aspiring entrepreneur, but also becoming a professional athlete. And so I actually ended up becoming professional cyclist, but it took so much toll on my health that I completely lost it in a national race. And I woke up in the hospital. All of my body just shut down because of no recovery and all of this, workforce. And essentially, I had to quit cycling only at about age of 19 or 20 because my health wasn't, comprehending the workload.
Mm.
Now, in that time, I had a autoimmune chronic fatigue. I had depression. I literally had a suicidal thoughts and feelings. It was one of the darkest times because I wanted to be this, athlete that had this identity that had to be completely shaved off. Now, in that process, I ended up moving to America, and I was searching for some business that can qualify to have visa to be able to, live here.
Mm.
And so, long story short, I went from sushi restaurant in Boulder, Colorado, that ended up not qualifying to Tutti Frutti frozen yogurt in Hawaii, which is how I originally got to Hawaii. And I ended up having a rights during the frozen yogurt era. I don't know if you remember when that was marketed as the healthy options for your dessert. But I was sick and tired of making people fat because there was this other part of me inside that knew what's healthy and what knew what's for the greatest good. And that was not it. So me dying inside at 22 years old, I flew to Florida, back where my original journey began as a foreign exchange student. And I went and I essentially found Orange Theory, went into a class, and it was very much the same as me being an athlete, high intensity interval training, using technology. And I was like, wow, this is it. Like this kind of, kills all of the things that I want to do. So here's a 22-year-old that drives across Florida, meets the founder and the president of Orange Theory with about 5-6 employees at that time, with only about 6 locations. So imagine now it's almost 2,000 worldwide. That didn't exist back then, and people called it Orange Therapy. That was the fun story. Now, I've never really been to Georgia before, but they were like, well, if you can figure out how to get this finance and signed within 2 days, you can have Georgia State. And I think it was their way of saying, screw you. If you can do it, you can have it, or it is what it is. And so I got it all figured out. Within 2 days, I was on a car drive to Atlanta. And essentially, I had to learn everything from, accounting and employees and legal and franchising. I mean, it was all fresh and new. And I was so young. Like now looking at it, I'm like, how the hell did people trust
Mm.
me and believe me at that time? But anyway, within 6 months, we became the fastest growing region in the entire chain. And that escalated into partnership with the president and CEO of Orange Theory. And then we went into the super urban markets. So we went to San Francisco, parts of New York, South Beach, Oregon, then Las Vegas, and Hawaii. And so essentially those were the main markets. And where I had the area rights. And then we had a whole bunch of franchisees, underneath that as well. And so we were managing, our locations, franchisees' locations, and essentially the whole, scale.
I mean, that's a hell of an origin story, right? I mean, it's kind of something like out of fantasy, like it's almost unbelievable, like something of that magnitude, and that's just the beginning of your story, right? Like that's not even where you are today. So what I've heard from you over and over again in multiple different ways, and since we started, is that you are designed to serve, to help, which kind of leads me to like the definition of a samurai is to serve. And you've actually had formal training with samurais. So I want you to talk about that experience and how that has helped you on your journey to success.
Yeah, it's so funny. So actually, so this is what I used to do. I would read a book or take a course, and then if that message really resonated with me, I wanted to meet the guy behind it or the lady behind it. And so this was actually through Dan Millman, which wrote the book The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, if I'm not mistaken. And essentially, he brought us to Japan to go on this samurai training and Zen master training.
Mm.
Essentially, we were learning what it is to be a peaceful warrior in today's world. Now, in this process, it's ironic. I actually didn't resonate with it as much as, well, at that time I did, but in long term, it was much harder, the processes, than it actually has to be, because a lot of it is old regiment paradigm versus actually, finding the access for yourself.
Mhm.
Now, in this, so I'll tell you a funny story. We would be waking up at 4 a.m. and do these long 4-hour meditations. And literally you would have a monk walking with a stick behind you. And if you start drifting, they would be keeping you awake essentially with the stick. And to me, this was a lot of discipline, fear-based, which at that time I thought that was it, right? But that also is what got me in trouble, because I was so disciplined and so regimented that I took it so far down that my health completely got shut down. So, my new self now would say, questioning it, right? Speaking to your body and asking, is this really what you need right now? Versus my old self, I don't care what you need, my body, you're going to be in this system and follow the processes and kind of the rational masculine way of doing things.
Very cool. So, I mean, obviously with that, I mean, growing into who you are right now, you found out that you were a cyclist, you were essentially selling frames, then you fell into Orange Theory, you built that out. And then the next thing, I would think was sound, right? I mean, those that are familiar with sound therapy, sound baths, and I think that you, even on your LinkedIn profile, you said that you're a DJ producer slash at the 528 hertz, which is essentially the miracle frequency. So I want you to kind of talk about that to a certain extent. It's like, again, your journey is very long, very impactful, but when did you start getting into like the sound and what sound can do for someone?
Yeah, so I think what's really important to understand, like I think we talked about the happy ending, right? Like right now it's all talking about the easy parts, right? The fun parts. And let me tell you something. So in this process, there was a period of life where my ego took over, where it became about having more. And I was thinking, I'm going to be the next billionaire and this and da 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 and more locations. And this is when I start making mistakes. So something good that I did, but also not so good, was starting a company called Tomorrow's Vision, which essentially was a purpose-driven private equity fund, so to speak, where my whole mission was to support early startups and that are here for the greatest good of the whole, and basically offering our team to scale what we've built, whatever it's accounting, legal, marketing, branding, and so forth, and for fraction of the cost, right? Help them scale. Now, when I was at the peak with Orange Theory, I also started a company called Atmosphere, which was the largest yoga, fitness, meditation studio in the Southeast, which was right in the heart of Buckhead next to Orange Theory. And, and I thought I'm going to scale this. And, I had leases in Hawaii, in LA, in all of these places. And I ended up getting delayed by 3 years from the opening because of the construction problems. Now, I lost tons of capital in this process. It ended up opening in the worst time possible. And in this same time, I also invested into meal plan, like a fresh meal plan delivery company, as well as countless of other things. So what happened to me at that time is I overextended time, money, every possible thing. And I went into the cave to basically have a soul search. Now, when I walked out of the cave and I decided that I want to live in service, I went into a brutal 3 years of shaving everything that I've ever had. I got divorced. I lost every single bit that I gained because I had such a high expenses, but I kept on selling all of these locations. So I had no more of that income that, was driving this ship. And so I got into a massive cash flow issues, which eventually led me to literally have 50 different accounts below zero. That's how bad it got. And essentially, I decided to serve, but then I forgot that, hey, you have all of these commitments and you can't just get out of something and completely without seeing it. And and honestly, I was so done. I was like, I'm done. I just want to do my DJ thing and have fun with this. And that's where I start making mistakes. Now, when I walked out of the cave, I learned how to produce music and I learned how to DJ, and I it was a very clear message and path, but I didn't realize all of the set of paths that I had to clear and bring it to the surface before I can actually, serve. So I pretty much went back to being a homeless. Literally, we had nothing. We had days we had to fast in this process, and in this time, I fallen really dark. I was, DJing at the major nightclubs and festivals, but also doing tons of drugs and, seeing the other part of the music scene that I, didn't start it for. And essentially to go back to the frequency. So there's this thing called solfeggio frequencies, which are meant to be healing for us. And as a visionary, I've always, done things different. And essentially what I did, I wanted to bring it into a modern sound. So that way we don't just have to listen to these subtle frequencies. We can actually dance and experience healing while we're doing it. And so that was essentially the start of the system reset tools, which we now teach. And it's a combination of breath, dance, and meditation. I call it the BDM. So you've got EDM, electronic dance music, but you also have got BDM, which is breath, dance, meditation. And in this integration, I found that people can actually access their nervous system, they can access their subconscious mind, and they can deal with all of these traumas and deal with all of these things of today's world in a very fun and awesome way. But it took me dark for several years before I, got that. And essentially, I didn't make it back until COVID. And, this is the story that I'm, not always as proud of, but literally it was, in a lot of ways given to me. And so when COVID happened, I was basically fucked. Like all of the locations I had left were, all physical locations. So not that we didn't have any cash flow to work with, we also had to shut down. And essentially, in that process, I told my team that was left, the little team, that in these periods of time, this is when we can, also grow the most. And so essentially we knew how to open locations. And so I used Orange Theory locations to start COVID testing. And essentially during COVID, there was no testing anywhere. And we built it into many, many locations around the country. We later built technology on how to clear people. And the intention was, how do we start events back? So our whole thing was like, screw this. After all of this effort, I had to cancel 40 events in just the first 3 months, which was essential to our income and to everything that we were doing. And so we basically went back into the business saddle. We teamed up of Orange Theory locations, and later on we just start opening physical locations. And we built it so far within just a very short time that we were the testing partners for Atlanta Hawks. We did Home Depot, we did IHG Hotels, Sony Pictures. I mean, we've tested some of the largest companies on the market, and that's how I made it back.
I think it's definitely phenomenal. And one thing that you said over and over again, which kind of leads me to talk about Danielle, also better known as the Fairy, you said we a lot, right? And so those that follow you and that know who you are and is looking at you like that's kind of like your better half. So I want you to kind of talk about in this journey, right? Like we're painting this picture, you had these ups and downs, you went into a cave, you had 100 locations, you were selling bikes, and there's all these different fragments in the timeline. When did she come into the picture?
Yeah, it's so funny because, honestly, if it wasn't for her, like I would go very dark. I mean, I was so south in the hardest parts when I was getting divorced, when I had literally no money, I have 2 kids to feed. I was so far down that I didn't think I'm gonna make it back up. I mean, I was, doing drugs, and I was doing so much alcohol just to basically mask the pain, that so many of us go through in these times, or in general, because of not facing who we are. Now it's crazy. So I found her in Hawaii. So everything got so bad that I literally, the only locations that I couldn't sell, or the only region was Hawaii with Orange Theory. And it got so bad that I had to move back there to essentially fix it. And that was about 3 months before COVID hit. So now imagine I move back, I like stop again doing all these teachings and DJing and everything that I loved. And I was like, okay, I got to go back to work essentially. Now, in that process, she was managing our big portion of the business, and I didn't even know she existed because I was so far out of the management side of things that, like I told you, I had no idea who was working there. So in that process, we met, and she had a big, deep desire for events and for everything that we're doing today. And so we kept on meeting every day, and she was like, so one of the things that I've always done with every single company was having a super strong company culture. And so I would ask people, what's your why and what is your driving force? And I always tell people, we live by 80-20. 80% of time you experience your why within our company, and 20% of the time you spend on things that are necessary, whatever it's called, leads and payroll, things that nobody likes to do, but it's essential, right? Mm-hmm. And so she was, just with everybody else, I wanted to know her why. And so her why was to create conscious events. And I was like, well, I spent last 4 or 5 years, doing this. So why don't we start a company that will also help with lead gen for our Orange Theories? So we started a thing called Unfiltered Events. And we were doing, yoga, fitness, dance parties that are without alcohol, and meditation and breath work. So everything that we're doing now, we started it, but then COVID hit. So, one slap after another. And that was the period when, I ended up moving to Houston. And, long story short, I moved there to build world's first ever biohacking hotel on top of, all of this. But we lost that too. So we had all of the funding, all of this was ready. But again, COVID kind of was a pivotal time for, the world. And essentially, she ended up moving there with me, and that's how she really helped me lift back up to see me in light, even though I was not in light at any level.
I think it's phenomenal, and kind of going back to my due diligence, right? I mean, your parents, right? Kind of just stepping back to who you are. You both your parents, and again, correct me if I'm wrong in any part of this story, but they had a joint venture as far as when you were younger, and I think the name of it was Campa was the name of the actual location that both of them worked together, and they actually use that to build revenue for your family. So it's kind of funny that you're kind of like where your dad is now, where your dad was back then. I want you to kind of talk about growing up in that environment in an entrepreneurial household with that Campa, and like what does that really mean to you?
Yeah, totally. So it's funny because it all went full circles behind. So actually, my dad now, I'm with him. He's with us, and we actually brought him back to essentially help our NOA AON e-commerce platform
Mm,
to essentially keep us organized, do all of the shipping, handling, customs. He deals with factories, and so post-communist era is when I was born. And essentially me and my dad, I'm sorry, me and my dad and my mom, there was nothing in check. Everything was gray. Everything was owned by the government. And essentially there was a huge opportunity in everything at the same time. So for them, they started with food business at first, but then they actually went into textile,
mhm.
and they start bringing clothing, kids clothing to Czech Republic and then beyond after. And essentially same thing, started with right after communists with nothing. They were driving back then from Turkey to Czech, which is a two day drive, bringing leather, bringing anything that could sell essentially in this time. And later on, I mean, we became very strong allies in business, whatever it was, real estate, whatever it was, the retail, wholesale. And in COVID, we kind of broke sideways because we just had to figure things out, and came back essentially now with our conscious product sale on the NOA AON website.
Yeah, I think it's definitely very, very interesting, right? And I mean, again, you're so diversified, but again, all of it is stemming from to serve. So if you can define yourself in just using 3 to 5 words, what would those 3 to 5 words be?
Yeah, I think it's driven, it's passionate, and it's unifying. Or my whole thing is about unity. I cannot
Mm,
stress that enough, because I am just tired of judgment and race differences. Like, I've never understood it until I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, that this even exists. Like, in my world, that never existed. And to see that, what people grow up in is just so far from my point of view. And I think that was the craziest part about our events, is we have the most diversified crowd you will ever
mm.
see. And it is because we welcome everyone. It doesn't matter what age you are. It doesn't matter, if your heart is open and you're ready to experience yourself at the greatest good, then you're welcome. And that's really, I think, my biggest mission.
Well, I think that's a phenomenal point. I mean, I think you had made a post about it. I think it was on Instagram or one of your social media platforms about traveling with your son and your daughter and giving them the opportunity to learn through the cultures that they're experiencing through you. So I want you to talk about, like, obviously coming from the background that you grew up in, and then you said you didn't really experience the negative side of things until you came to Atlanta, but now you're influencing your kids to not only be entrepreneurs, but also be very inviting to multicultural environments.
Yeah, see, it's so funny. Like, I view kids as if they are, adults, because I think we obviously have to spoon fed them at a different stage of what they're able to comprehend, but we also cannot disrespect them in a ways of what they already know and what they are seeking. And I think the norm in a culture is to shut kids down when they have questions and ideas. And that shutting down is the pivotal moment of why our culture doesn't question. So think about it. Our culture is, we're being brought up to be factory workers or sheeps in a lot of ways. And essentially, only very few sheeps, right? They move out of the herd to then start their own herds. But I challenge even that is that we need to wake all of us up to this greater potential, which happens through education, through traveling, through just understanding and learning through our differences, which leads us to a very simple thing, which after literally traveling the world, I've came to a conclusion that we're way more alike than we're different. Only thing that separates us is air. I mean, literally. And if you, let's say you convert the idea of air into space, then, think about it. We're off the same space, off the same, frequency. And essentially that led me to understanding of our existence in like these three different ways. So there is the me, which is the individual consciousness, the aspect that you can affect. And that's part of your physical body. That's your health, your sleep, nutrition, diet, everything around body. Then you've got your mind, which is everything to do with your thoughts. What do you think of yourself? What do you think of another? Because if you don't, fuel your mind with the proper information and new education, you're going to be living that limited life. Then you've got your emotions, which, again, we're brought up to not look into our emotions. We're brought up that crying for men specifically is weakness. And see, until I realized and went back in time to all my traumas and to all the people I've hurt, and I opened up that emotional body, I was again limited. And then we have this spiritual side of us, which is completely hidden, whatever it's religions and whatever it's, dogmas and beyond. And this is really the outside of living outside of your five senses. So think about your physical body as your five senses that everybody understands and that get us in trouble a lot of times. And then you've got your spiritual senses, which is your psychic part of yourself. Now, everybody has these. This is not a woo wow. And it's essentially, if I just dumb it down, think of it as your spiritual gifts. And everybody has the gift of hearing. Now, when I say hearing, it's the subtle voice that has your highest interest inside of your head. It's the voice that tells you don't drink anymore, go to gym, go to sleep instead of watching Netflix, right? It's that voice that helps us to navigate us. But a lot of times we avoid that voice, which is what gets us in trouble. We've got the other gift, which is your seeing, whatever it's lucid dreaming or it's visions, as simple as having a vision 10 years from now or 2 years from now to start a new business or something new that is not here yet. That's our psychic seeing, essentially. Then we've got our intuition or knowing, which is when you think you don't know, but when you know, you don't require thinking. So it's that inner, like, I knew I shouldn't have trusted that person. I knew I should have gone home when, you should have. And that's something that, again, we have to listen to, but we don't always pay attention to. And then you've got your feeling, which is also could be considered empath. And that's when you had a bad feeling about someone, or you go into a room and there was a fight and the room doesn't feel right. So these are our four psychic senses that everybody has, but we're not brought up to understand them. And I've learned about this in a psychic village in Brazil. So I spent, literally a month with the psychics in Brazil to open them up, to open myself up to these other gifts that we're not taught, that are really no-brainer when you actually start working with them. Now, the way you build them, you acknowledge them. Just like when you go to gym and you build your muscles, you simply say, thank you, I heard it, or thank you, I saw it. Thank you, I, acknowledge it or feel it. And when you start acknowledging it and also pay attention to the message that it's trying to convey to you, then your life starts working for you. And it's the shift. And that's basically the me. So me is an individual consciousness. Then you've got the we, which is collective. And naturally, so this is what happened for me. I start fixing my health. I start fixing my mental health, emotional well-being, and connecting to my spiritual side of things. And then I was like, what about others, right? Like we naturally go from self-mastery, which is when we learn and educate and grow as a me, and we go into service. And, I literally, there's not a person that I've never, ever met that wouldn't tell you they want to do something good for another. Like we have, it's a divine nature inside of us. So when you look at the we, the collective, that's when you start thinking about your relationships. So anything that you are, that makes up who you are within your, cultures, but also it's the environment. And that could be water that you drink, air that you breathe, food that you eat, anything in the collective, the we consciousness. And then there's the final one, which is the supra collective or supra consciousness. And I call it the B, the essence. And that is, how did we get here? There is obviously, we wake up every morning and there is a sun moving around us. There is a moon. There's all of these other concepts that we can't even comprehend, but we're off that, supra consciousness. So me, we, and B is the three models that I teach, that essentially we take people on to educate them on this simple way of life. And essentially that's kind of, in this journey, I've came across this very prominent model.
So I mean, this playing off of B, and earlier on you had said, going back in time, right? And then you also earlier said that you had some ups and downs, right? You had some dark places to where you've overcame them. So going from the state of mind of being in the B, if you could time travel back to a younger version of yourself, when would you go back to, and what would you do differently if you could do it all over again?
Yeah, well, so it's so funny. In this process, I've learned about these 4 stages. So there's 4 stages of this journey. And see, what I would do differently is bring more awareness and more consciousness, or more light to each of them. So first of all, I wouldn't be so damn hard on myself. And I think, whatever it's guilt of not being good enough, whatever it's guilt of not working hard enough, it would be, that guilt, those negative parts of my thoughts and emotions is something that I've just like wasted way too much time, in my life. The other part would be to forgive myself and accept myself as I am, because my whole life I fought with, am I good enough to do this? And can I, at my age, right? Like, will people trust me? And there's been doubt after doubt that was all made by the small self, the egoic part of me. And so, in this way, I basically created these 4 steps to recognize where I am. And so I would bring these steps to it, so that way I don't continue being hard on myself, but rather go through them as a natural cycle of life. And so these 4 stages, stage 1 is wake up or awakening. So you wake up that there is a better solution. There is something else that you can do. And that applies to all of the me, we, be. So as an example, you go and get a blood work and you wake up that you have a really high toxicity. Let's say that you have a really high environmental toxins, which is what's making you tired and sick, right? So in a wake up process, you realize something is not working. Then you go into the second stage, which is the cleanup process. And so if you had a high toxicity, you would detox, right, on a physical level. If you had a really negative emotions or thoughts towards someone, you would let that go. You would work with that someone or through them in the cleanup phase. Now, when you clean up and you create more room for your life, then you're ready to go into the third phase, which is the power up phase. And in power up, you will maybe get a vitamin C and glutathione, and maybe you will find new friends. You will also replace your emotions with more happiness, more playfulness. So do you see? So then you go into, bring that new stuff in because you created the space. And then the fourth stage is rest up. And this is what I would definitely tell myself the most. I would never rest. I would not take time off. I would not take time just for myself. And if you don't take time without your cell phone, without anybody, how the hell are you going to hear who you are? Does that make sense? So for me, it happened first time in a cave. But now I just take once in a week, and then 3 times per month, and then once in a year, time which is dedicated just me with myself, with my thoughts, and recreating that cycle again. And these cycles work on a micro basis, on a me part, right, within your body, mind, emotions, and spirit. But these also cycles work on macro basis, which is what are you dealing with as a culture, or as a as a country, right? There's a collective, essentially karma in a lot of ways. You could make that statement, and that's this fourth step of the journey
Mm.
that I would give myself.
So let's unpack that for today for the listener, right? And let's make a hypothetical listener. Let's say it's a listener that's middle age, right? They've had successes and failures just like everyone else in that category. And me and my wife talk about this pretty frequently, and I actually talked about this on an episode earlier today about being in that middle age spot to where on one hand you're dealing with the life events and the health issues of your parents, and you're also dealing with the teenagers that are upgrowing, and then you're dealing with your own personal demons all at the same time. So that's the only time in a lifespan that you're dealing with these three things at the same time. What words of wisdom would you give to someone to kind of help them to shift between, like you said before, like the we and the be, to become their whole selves?
Yeah, so I think first thing first, you've got to question your existence, your why. So your intention, where your intention goes, your energy flows. Now, if your intention goes to what you think that goes for you, which is when you're thinking, when you're just using your egoic or smaller self for this matter, then that's that self that only knows whatever you've learned in the past and whatever you're projecting into the future. So it's a limited self, right? So in a lot of ways, number one, you have to understand that you did not come here just to have a job, to have a success, and to, raise your kids and be done with it. We came here to Earth to descend from this granular, aspect of us, the unseen that we can't comprehend, to ascend. So essentially, we came here to descend, to ascend, to learn through all of these experiences that we call life. But in this process, we forgot that we are actually extremely powerful. We're creators of our own reality in every aspect. And let me dim it down so simple. When you own your time, you own your life. So essentially, in this process, you want to determine what is taking your essence, your life away, and what is bringing your life to you. In a even simpler forms, we either live in a degenerative spiral, which means we're doing things that we're taught to do and we're sick and tired of our job or our boss, and we continue living in this negative AON based spiral, which is that degeneration, versus living in the regenerative spiral, which then touches every aspect of yourself. And that is when you're doing things based on your passion, based on your purpose, and creating legacy through them. Now, when you're regenerating, everything works for you. This is law of synchronicities. You're essentially spending time the way you choose to, which is bringing your frequency up to your highest potential. Now, in this process, though, you got to pause, because how do you even know what your purpose is if you're just constantly doing and doing and doing what other people want you to do? So if you take a pause, you connect with your breath, you just leave for a weekend to a cabin, whatever it is, you got to remove yourself from everything so you can hear. And then that inner calling, that passion that's been always calling you, whatever it's to create a book or to to write, to dance, or to travel, whatever your passion is, you got to hone it down, write it down, and spend at least every day 1% of your time on passion. So for me, to give you example, it's music. So it's to create music, to whatever, it's new music, or to DJ, anything around music and frequency sound. That is my passion. Now, then you got to find your purpose. And whatever that purpose is, don't get upset if it's not here yet, but it's whatever that inner silent voice is telling you. Every once in a while, it's coming back. And usually it comes when you're off, when you're not going to work every day. It comes to you like, I wish I did, that, whatever that is. You have to find and define that for you in that process. Now, for me, purpose is teaching. So it's our retreats, it's our workshops, it's our lectures, it's masterminds, it's anything that I can give myself away, essentially, with all of the tools that I've learned. That is when I live in purpose. Now, how do we integrate all of this, right? So it's passion, purpose, and legacy. Legacy, I call career, mission, job, work, something that will end up making you money so you can live in this third dimensional space. And again, there's nothing wrong with it. And I used to have a, bad relationship with money. I thought that I can only make money with being an entrepreneur, and didn't realize that I can make it through my passion and purpose that will make legacy. So when you go to our website today, the NOA AON, essentially I integrated everything. So we have the purpose, all of the retreats, workshops around the world. We have the passion, which is the musical experiences that we curate. And then we also sell conscious products, offerings, courses, and an on-demand library. So here's just an example of how I was able to integrate every aspect of my life, so I no longer live for someone else.
Yeah, and I mean, I think part of like being in branding, you're living the brand. Like the fact that you renamed yourself to coexist with your brand in parallel structure, like it's one and the same. So for you, you're probably at your happiest state of mind when you're doing or serving at the highest capacity that you probably can. But at the same time, you're also delivering to your family. And like you said before, it's something that's an opportunity for you to take your kids on islands and take your kids to the beach, or take your kids on in all these different adventures that you've had, throughout your life. Your kids have been there with you a particular segmentation of it, but you're giving them opportunities to see what the world really is about versus just being landlocked into one location. So with all of those things, right? My next question is, like, out of all of your achievements, and again, you have dozens of achievements outside of your family, which one is your greatest achievement to date?
So here's the thing. So first thing first, I don't really view any of it as an achievement in a lot of ways, because I see it when we're proud of something, we should live in a constant revolving joy. So first thing first, like I never feel like I'm a master of anything but dancing with life, and that is the mastery through everything, right? And so if I can have an achievement, it is to live in a harmony and balance with all of the way I spend my time. And I think if I can continue basically choosing every experience that I'm living, then there is no better achievement in that perspective than to do so. And that applies to everything and everyone, right? And that's, again, reminder for everyone listening, we are supposed to live our life the way we choose to. But if we don't take time to choose how we want to live the life, how are you expecting to live life that you want to? And so that's there.
Well, and I think through that also is influences as well too, right? I mean, I think there was like a little video clip when your daughter was younger and she was getting her first ice bath. And and it was like she was like, I think you asked her, somebody asked her how was it. She was like, it's good, but she was shaking because obviously it was cold, but she was enjoying it because it was her first experience. So I want you to talk about, like, how important is it to, yes, to be successful in your business. Yes, you're talking about state of mind, but in reality, the experiences that make you who you are, how relevant are those to become successful?
It's everything. So I've always been a person that never cared for things. So when it comes to things and stuff, and that had never defined me. And I can tell you, when I had nothing, I felt no different, as well as when I had everything, or considerably everything. And and I went from flying private jet to living the 5+ stars lifestyle, to completely everything being wiped away from me. And in that process, I've never changed when it came to, that piece. So every single time I valued ever, it's been all experiences. And this is when, like, it was so hard for some people even understand that we had nothing in those periods of time, because the little things we had, we always reinvested it into, self-growth, travel, education. And this is when, people have to release fear, and they have to replace it with trust, because the one thing I've always had was this trust and divine knowing that I will be okay no matter what. Now, when I say no matter what, you still want to have the intention, which is for the highest good of all. Because if you're living a life that is all about self-interest and how can I gain all of these goals for having a bigger house and better car and bigger plane or whatever that is, then you are living in duality. And there's two ways to manifest or to create. There is the heart way to manifest, which comes from that greatest good of all, from service and from learning, that can manifest you millions, billions, whatever. We are meant to be abundant beings. But here's the catch. There was a movie called Secret, which maybe you know, that was all about law of attraction.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the conventional third chakra or small self creation, where we start thinking how we will have this big house, and we start putting all the efforts to it, and but then it has a catch. Maybe you get the house, you can create whatever you wish to, but if it's not of your highest good and it comes from a place of your ego, then maybe the house burns in a few months. Or maybe what happens is you will lose job that was paying for the mortgage of the house, right? So there's always a catch unless you live off of this highest knowing. And that's what happened to me,
Yeah. I could definitely see it. So obviously you're setting up to where you've lived it, you lived the example, and you're trying to help people avoid going through what you went through, which again is the highest way you can serve, right?
Absolutely.
I'm listening. Go ahead.
No, so that's what ultimately we will come back to, right? But here's the thing: in this process of coming to, there is there's a stages of consciousness that you have to embody. And so there's 5 stages which actually are also represented in our company cultures. And the stage 1 is life sucks. This is usually gangs. This is usually third world countries where life actually does suck and people don't know how to get out of it. Now, second stage is my life sucks, which is that victimhood mindset, where we start realizing that my life is worse than yours. Then third stage is I am great and you are not. This is when you become more confident, educated. I don't want to badmouth doctors or attorneys, but a lot of times somebody with a very large education, they think of themselves as better than somebody else because they didn't go through that same education. And so that's just an example. Now, fourth stage is we are great. This is when you move out of the me into a collective, but you are not. So it's a still competition in a ways. And to give you example, it would be like Olympics, right? You've got USA against Mexico or USA against Canada. It's a team against team that's unified. And then fifth stage is life is great, period. How do we experience this inherent divine with all of us together? And how do we educate and learn and share those gifts between one another? And so that's, kind of like a quick breakdown of the layers we might be going through. And essentially, without each layer, it's kind of like a milestone to our, intelligence of your emotional intelligence of growth.
I think it's definitely interesting, and I think like this episode is one of the episodes to where I think this is probably going to be part 1 of a couple other episodes, because there's so many different things that we can kind of talk about as far as like strategy, as far as like marketing, as far as philosophy, and as far as how all these things intertwine to not only become successful but also be happy as well, right? Because that's people are trying to be successful to ultimately be happy, but ideally you're gonna have to be happy before you can be successful. So it's kind of like this duality, like you said earlier on, and I think you definitely brought that to light this particular episode. So going into closing, what I like to do is whoever I'm interviewing, and I think that you're such a phenomenal guest and you have so many different insights, I would like you to become the host of the Boss Uncaged podcast, and I would like you to interview me. So what questions do you have for me?
I love it. And so first of all, thank you for what you're doing, because it is a crucial part of our evolution. So I always say education equals inspiration. Inspiration gives you motivation, and that gives you results in life. So kudos to you, number one, to spend this time and doing this, because without you, people wouldn't be part of that awakening process. Now, the question I would have for you is, you have seen a lot of episodes and and podcasts, what is the top three trailing things that people are repeating? Because I think there's a data set that you're starting to gather, which could be interesting to use.
Yeah, I think it's so difficult to take so many different words and to compile them into one. But I think that one word for everyone that I've interviewed, including yourself, it's just focus is one. Focus is one of the primary things. It doesn't matter if it's focused on multiple things. It's just focus on where you are and where you're going. Like that's always the constant movement, which goes back to your name. It's always progressing. The progress of not just winning, the progress of living, the progress of becoming a champion, the progress of success, all of that is in that forward movement. So that's one thing. I think another one is overcoming hurdles. Everyone has some kind of hurdles, whether it's death, health, or mental. Like you said before, you were in a dark place, you were drinking. That's always something that's common. It's always some moment of this could end right now, or I could overcome it and become more than where I am right now. And that's another reoccurring thing. And third, but last but not least, what I've seen collectively is legacy. People are always they're building these empires or they're building these companies, these corporations, but much like your daughter being in an ice bath, you're essentially creating these environments. And I think the other thing that you did well too is that one of your services is tribal dinner experience. It kind of goes back to exactly what you're doing. You're building these micro experiences for you, for others, for your family, so they can kind of live and see what life is really about.
Beautiful. Yes. And it's so funny, we all have, ultimately it's one message. What is truth is always truth, and what is lie will eventually come out. And whatever it's dogmas, whatever it's teachings, religions, governments, things that are not of this highest good, they will come out and they will be shook when enough people will start seeing it for what it is. And I think that's what I see everywhere I go is, it doesn't matter where you get it. It's whatever resonates with you, to take it and stop, wasting your time with being in a victimhood mindset. It's time to take that charge, take the control, start solving one thing at a time, and be aware of your power. You are so much more than you think.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, I mean, it goes back to your nickname, right? The harmonious boss. And again, I think you're living on like the miracle frequency, right? So I mean, all of these things and even like your nickname all ties into everything that you're doing. So I think it's a phenomenal, it's a little bit of twist on our standard episodes, but I think brings a little bit of enlightenment to understand that not everything you need to do to be successful needs to be clear cut. You have to kind of carve your own path and make sure that you're happy on that journey.
Yeah, I see it as like a boundaries, right? Like you build yourself up, or your software, right? Your If you think of your mind as a software and your body as the hardware, and then if you think of a computer or iPhone or whatever you're using as, you've got a certain amount of apps, and each app you either use or you don't use. The same
Mm,
thing we have in our life. We have a certain amount of relationships, certain amount of qualities and thoughts and ideas that we either use or don't use. But
mm,
if we continue using the same freaking programming that is obviously not working for us, and if we don't hold the app and exit out of it, we're just going to keep on reliving the same life that we lived.
mm.
But this is why connecting to the what I like to call internet, so computers and iPhone needs to be connected to internet to download and upload new software. Well, that's what meditation is for. That's what breath work is for. That's what this time being on your own is for. You connect to the internet to reapply all of the things or reassess all of these things. So that way you can move into that passion, purpose, legacy that you deserve to have.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think I definitely appreciate you being on the show today. I think this is not going to be the last time we're going to be in communication. I think there's so many different things that we can continue to unpack. And I always make this facetious joke about, an hour is kind of like a window of opportunity, but in reality, now I understand why Joe Rogan's podcast is 4 or 5 hours long, because you start to get into these in-depth conversations and you go down these deep wormholes. And there's only one way for you to unpack it is just over time.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, I definitely appreciate you being here. I think the listener got some serious insight from a different point of view on how you can also be successful and how you could also live a prosperous life as well. So I definitely appreciate you and thank you.
Absolutely. And one thing I do want to mention is everything that we've talked about, we actually have something called High Achiever course,
Mm.
which takes people into like a mastermind. It's a digital way to connect with us. And we're launching one in August, which we will literally go through the me, we, be, we'll go through the passion, purpose, legacy, and we'll actually help people define it and find it for themselves. And so I think that's something that I would love to share with you guys.
Yeah, and I think also you have a summit coming up in London next month as well. Why don't you tell them a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we'll be back on a global tour. So we have, I think we have 6 events in London. So if anybody's there, we do anything from conference to like a day reset, all the way to our system reset, which is at this old church. It's gonna be this full-on musical experience with instrumentalists and sound healers. It's that's kind of how we take it to another level, just like if you went into a show, but obviously we use breath as the choice of drug. And then we'll be in Orlando for the largest biohacking conference in the world with Dave Asprey. And then we're going to Asia, so we'll have a whole Asian tour following. But yeah, you can just find us online at the noaaon.com for the latest updated events. And also we're giving a 90-day free on-demand library to all the listeners with all of our meditations and breath work. So you can kind of figure out what's the daily time spent for you, so you can discover all the things that we've talked about.
And the address for that one for the free 90 days, do you want to go ahead and recite that so they could go ahead and go to that page?
Yeah, so it's the NOAAON.com, NOAAON.com, and then we're actually send a special link, so we'll give it in the bio, so that way people can just click on it and it's easy. But it's under the on-demand library essentially.
Perfect. Well, again, I definitely appreciate you. I look forward to seeing what else you're going to do. I mean, obviously, being a world traveler, there's no telling where you're going to be at any given time, right? Which is definitely a hell of a life to live. So I definitely appreciate you being here. And again, for the listener, they thank you.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.